From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Our connection this hour was made in 1958 when President Dwight D. Eisenhower called for a new national holiday. Do you know which holiday? Every year, May 1st is Law Day. You're forgiven if this is news to you. There are no Law Day picnics that I'm aware of, no Law Day parades or fireworks. Just the idea that once a year, it is important to reaffirm that the United States is a country governed by law and no man or woman is above those laws. Eisenhower said that when he served in the Army, he saw what happens when the rule of law breaks down in many places around the world that he visited. And he said he never wanted to see that happen in the United States. Today is Law Day 2026. And it is tempting to think that the rule of law is under threat like never before. But we all tend to struggle with recency bias. You might think that political division and vitriol are worse than ever in this country. I would remind you that in the year 1800, a newspaper opposed to the candidacy of Thomas Jefferson wrote that if Jefferson is elected, quote, murder, robbery, rape, adultery, and incest will all be openly taught and practiced, end quote. So yes, this country has endured division and attacks on the rule of law. Andrew Jackson was reported to have said after the Supreme Court ruled on the application of state laws to Cherokee lands, quote, John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it, end quote. But it's worth asking if the recent attacks on the judiciary go beyond the norm. President Trump has publicly demeaned the justices, questioning their intelligence and directing them to rule in his favor in cases like birthright citizenship, and that's just for starters. A group of local judges has published an op-ed on this Law Day titled, On Law Day, Celebrate Judicial Independence, and they write in part, quote, as retired judges, we are not afraid of a robust public debate over the role of judges in our system of law and order. We know from firsthand experience that judges weighing difficult choices in complex legal and criminal justice matters may make controversial decisions, and the public can justifiably question those difficult choices and their public consequences. But the tenor of the debate needs to reflect our shared sense of community values, end quote. And we've welcomed the judges to come in and discuss it. We'll go around the table. Retired from the New York Court of Claims, Rick Dollinger is back with us. Judge, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having us, Evan.
Next to Rick is retired from the New York State Supreme Court, John Ark. Judge Ark, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
Across the table, retired also from the New York State Supreme Court is Joseph Valentino. Judge, welcome back to you.
Thank you, Evan.
Retired from Monroe County Court is Patricia Marks, and Judge Marks, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Evan.
So, Rick, I was reading in the piece for this Law Day. By the way, happy Law Day, everybody.
Oh, thank you.
Did I miss? Is there a parade or are there fireworks that I'm not aware of?
Only in the courthouse.
Yeah.
That's
right.
Go watch a trial and you'll see plenty of fireworks.
But really, I mean, when you read Eisenhower's words, it's interesting. The idea is on Law Day, there are different things that are being done by bar associations and different groups across the country to work sometimes with students, with schools, to reaffirm these values. And reading the piece here, I'm going to ask all of you just about how you would characterize the moment. So, Judge Dollinger, when you write that the tenor of the debate needs to reflect our shared sense of community values, why are you making that point right now? What stands out to you?
Well, like so much in our political world these days, it's framed by some as a personality battle. It's a personality battle between the president and the Democrats in the House or the Senate. It's a personality battle between members of the state legislature. And it seems to me that really obscures the longstanding American tradition that it should be a fight over both the values and the substance. And I think we've just got to get away from this notion of you disagree with someone and you call him vile names and say that he shouldn't be a judge or he shouldn't be a member of the state legislature. When we get into that kind of personal attack, and by the way, let me say outside the context of an election, I get how in election races it can get very personal. But these are, in many cases with the federal judiciary, these are lifetime appointments. These ladies and gentlemen are not going to be subject to any future appointment or election. And to call them out by name and criticize them by name, even recently, Supreme Court judges calling other members of the Supreme Court names. It's just gotten way too personal. It's time we focused on the issues and on the commonality of the American experience and cut the personalities out.
Judge Ark, how would you describe what you're seeing in the current sort of landscape?
Well, there's clearly been a demeaning of the dialogue. Now that Rick brought that up, the fact that we're all subject to advancement. A bunch of years ago, I wrote an op-ed piece. I took the position that it was better to elect judges, and the other side of the argument was better to appoint judges, which you get a better caliber of judges. But even the appointed judges are always looking for another step up until you get to the U.S. Supreme Court. There's no place further or higher than that as far as the judiciary. And what's remarkable, what Rick just pointed out, is there's now this contention, this public contention on a personal basis between the U.S. Supreme Court judges, which is really quite remarkable because they really shouldn't have a dog in the fight. They have the final say on issues of law for the nation, and to personalize it is really quite remarkable.
Across the table, Judge Valentino, what do you think?
Well, I agree with my colleagues, first of all. And secondly, I've noticed probably within the last 10 years or so that the media has labeled judges when they report on a case or report on something happened. It's prefaced by this judge was an Obama judge. This judge was a Bush judge. This judge was a Trump judge. You never heard that years ago. And I think what that does is that erodes public confidence in impartiality. They think, oh, yeah, well, he's a Democrat, so he's going to rule as Democrats. He's a Republican. That never used to happen before, but this is the way we've proceeded. And as far as, the nastiness between judges or the nastiness of calling somebody out, never saw that before either. Politeness is gone quite a bit in our society now, and there's no barrier anymore to nastiness.
Judge Marks.
I agree with what my colleagues have said. I mean, during my time on the bench, if I had one personal threat, it was an extraordinary rarity. Security came to my defense and watched out for me. That's not happening on the federal level and on other levels. The level of threats is astounding and scary. And there's not a recognition by the public about the independence of the judiciary and how we have to transition. Many of us were advocates before we became judges. That transition was difficult, but the understanding you had to apply the rule of law in a fair, impartial way, that there are things still in the Constitution, presumption of innocence, all the other values, separation of powers seems to have gone by the wayside a bit.
So in a moment, I'm going to read the first email that came in that is interesting. It comes from a listener named Alex, and I'm sure the judges will weigh in on some of Alex's suggestions. Listeners, if you want to weigh in on what you see in terms of, are you trusting institutions these days? Do you trust courts? Do you feel like things are working the way they are supposed to on this law day and every day? Connections@wxxi.org is the email address. You can join the chat on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube, and you can call the program toll-free, 844-295-TALK. It's toll-free, 844-295-8255. Judge Dollinger, you and I spoke a little yesterday, and I don't want to derail and have you read the entire op-ed that you've all written together. We're going to post that in our show notes if we can, because I'd like people to read it.
Go ahead.
But I do want you to just give us a few of the bits of history that goes all the way back to the Old Testament. And throughout history, because part of what I want to do is explore the question of whether we are struggling with recency bias, whether this moment feels like an outlier, or whether it is just sort of part and parcel with how it has always been in some way.
It from my point of view, as our article mentions, I mean, you can go right back to the Old Testament and the first 10 books of the Bible. What's fascinating is they talk about judges all the time. In fact, if you look carefully at the first 10 books, always strikes me, you have the Torah, the first 5 books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And then you have the book of Joshua, who, of course, succeeded Moses and brought the Israelites into the Promised Land. And then you have the book of Judges, because the recognition, and it actually is, the history is that the judges really ruled the Israelites for a period of almost 350 years. an enormous amount of time as they set up the structure of their land and eventually evolved into a king. But the point is, they recognized that these were the judges. They were the individuals who had to make decisions about the greater law, in that case, the greater law of God, and in the individual laws of the community. So they were criticized. They were warned in the early books about you have to be impartial, you can't take bribes, all those things. And then you just roll through American history. Start with, I mentioned in the article, New Amsterdam. Peter Stuyvesant, the first governor of New Amsterdam when the Dutch ruled New York, he was fighting with magistrates all the time because he disagreed with the decisions they made as the commercial aspects of New York State evolved. Fast forward, you mentioned Andrew Jackson and the fight with John Marshall over the Cherokee land. You go to Dred Scott. No decision of the Supreme Court was more roundly criticized. Roger Taney, who was the chief judge, was burned in effigy throughout the North. It eventually led to the Civil War. You get to the progressive era and the building of the New Deal and Franklin Roosevelt. He gave up criticizing the judge. He simply said, guess what? We're going to change the number of judges, and I'm going to appoint all the new judges. I want to change the Supreme Court.
Right, like it feels like it had been pulled out of Pete Buttigieg's speech from last
week.
Correct.
It was like, we know how to solve the problem of a non-responsive Supreme Court. I'll appoint them all, and we'll pack them. And then the other one I mentioned, which shouldn't be ignored, is when the Warren Court desegregated the schools, changing the notion of segregation in the South. The John Birch Society printed flyers and billboards that said, impeach Earl Warren, who was the chief judge of the United States Supreme Court. And they were flooding the country with all of that. So all those parts of history, I think we look at today and say, maybe even more pointed. I'm concerned because I think social media feeds more and more of this vitriol.
Yes.
But the notion that the courts in the United States are part of government, one of the three branches, and they are subject to criticism, from my point of view, it's all part of the give and take of a democracy. We have to have that give and take. It just shouldn't be personal. It should be about the laws and the respect for law. Anyway.
So let me ask your colleagues. So Judge Ark, when I read through that history, when I think about the fact that there was an impeach Earl Warren movement over civil rights, how could I argue that today is worse than it's ever been? I mean, if these things have happened in the past, or do you think it is worse than it's ever been in your perspective?
Well, back in the 80s, I put some protesters in jail. I think I was the first judge in New York State, and they showed up protesting. And for a couple of years thereafter, they were wherever I would show up, or my co-judge, who had nothing to do with it at the time, would have pickets and signs. And
why'd you put them in jail?
They were obstructing a obstetrician's office. Mm-hmm. They were pro-life protesters, and they obstructed the office. And then when the police came, the police arrested them, and they resisted the police, and then they were charged with obstruction and whatnot.
Brief aside, Judge, as the Republican on the panel here,
right.
I don't know your personal views on reproductive health, but did you have any hesitation to put people in jail if you thought they were obstructing in this way?
I didn't put them in jail because they were obstruction. I never got that far because when I went to arraign them, it was about noon on a Sunday afternoon. And when you arraign somebody, you ask what their name is. And I think there were 33 of them, and 33 of them said Baby John Doe or Baby Jane Doe. So I said, look, the game's starting, Bill's game's starting in an hour. And if you people want to go in the back of the courtroom and discuss this, and I suggest, here's what you do. Give me your name, and then say, also known as Baby Jane or Baby John Doe. They huddled in the back of the courtroom. I called them up to the bench, and I said, can you give me your name, please? And they persisted in not giving me their name and saying Baby Jane or Baby John. And had this been somebody arrested for a shoplifting or whatever it might have been, wouldn't give me their name, I have no recourse but to send them down to jail until the police can identify who the person was. And that was really that was the extent of my philosophic commitment to the issue.
Yeah.
Okay, and little did I know that that somebody taking a picture of him the next day in the front page of the newspaper was the 33 defendants standing there, and how I had put them all in jail, and we ended up trying a couple of the cases and whatnot, but I never wasn't a full.
And did you ever feel unsafe in your job? Do you feel that it is more volatile, dangerous now for active judges?
No, I mean, it was interesting because a month or two later, when this thing started to calm down, they decided to picket my house, and just coincidentally, I had a trip planned for that weekend, and I heard that they were going to picket the house, but I left on Friday regardless. I had to go away, but I bought some donuts and left them on the front.
You charmer.
Yeah, so, but yeah, I mean, we're obviously vulnerable, but if I make a decision and somebody doesn't like it, they could take it to Judge Valentino in the appellate division. Yeah. Okay, and that's really how the system works. And the only time actually somebody really not even threatened me, they called me in the middle of the night once when I was a town judge, and they had been in front of me in a small claims case over they'd taken a dress shirt, a silk dress shirt, to a dry cleaner who had ruined it in the dry cleaning. And for whatever reason, he didn't like it. However, I decided the case. And at 2 or 3 in the morning, he decided to call me to see if I could reflect upon my decision. But I have a feeling that from the noise in the background, it was a bar or something like that. But if people understand that there's always recourse beyond what we do, and that's why I was concerned with a problem within the character of the U.S. Supreme Court, because they have the ultimate say. And by the time something gets there, people have had several days in court and whatnot, opportunities. And we're there just to either resolve issues between individuals or, frankly, to protect citizens from the government. That's really a big part of our job. Yeah. And we do the best we can.
Well, Judge Valentino, does that tour through history convince you that that rancor has always been there, or does this feel unique?
Yes, the rancor has always been there, but we're in a unique time now. Excuse me. I hit the cough button.
You got to hold the cough button, but that's all right.
All right.
You're in my court now.
That's true. That's true. It's interesting that both you and Rick Dollinger quoted President Jackson in that quote where he said, okay, Justice Marshall, he made his decision, now let him go out and enforce it. If you notice, there was no name calling there. There was no berating him. He just said, yeah, let him go enforce it now. I mean, it was there wasn't that bile that you're hearing now.
I'm with you on the bile and the name calling, but substantively, it's shocking to hear a president say, all right, there's the Supreme Court. Good luck enforcing it, buddy. I mean, that's just as, to me, you can attach name calling or not. As a citizen of this country, that is incredibly troubling.
No, I agree with you. And there are other quotes from Andrew Jackson that were just as troubling.
I imagine so.
During his presidency. But my point was that back then, as we indicated earlier, there were no threats like that. John Ark reminded me, I also had trial with protesters way back when. There was a bunch of protesters at the federal building in Fred Eckert's office when he was our representative. And so the Rochester police arrested them for disorderly conduct or whatever, and they protested too. And there were no threats to me. The only thing I remember, they went to the press, they were on TV and stuff, and one guy referred to me as that bald-headed guy. So that was the biggest threat that I received on that. So there was no nastiness at that particular time.
Can I just suggest?
Yeah.
Truth is a defense to that accusation, correct, Judge Valentino?
Well, I understood that. That's correct.
Judge Marks, does this time feel unique to you?
I think it is because of the intensity. I mean, I used to get threats related to, we were in charge of pistol permit revocation, and people and their guns, your personal opinion has nothing to do with those decisions. It has to do with what the law is. Appeals from small claims court was another area where I received threats, but not to a vile nature, not necessarily stepped up to the public. The really interesting thing about history that you brought out, the Book of Judges, there were women, at least one
Deborah.
woman in the book, Deborah, right, in the Book of Judges. So there are waves of history over time. It was a little harder for women, though, I think.
I think in those days it was a little harder for women. I'll concede that.
So I'm going to read an email from Alex that'll kind of kick off, I think, going in a couple different directions here. Where did I have that from this morning? Sorry, Alex, here it is. He says, "Hi, Evan. The High Court has always been political, and no one who says we can remove politics from the court should be taken seriously. The difference today is that the entire process is pure politics. Republicans would not allow a vote on Merrick Garland 10 years ago, and that has created a political blood sport. We're not even surprised when the President of the United States insults the Supreme Court by name and demands that they do his bidding. We think it's normal now. It's not supposed to be normal. That's why I now support expanding the court, because if you can't beat them, join them. If Republicans will never allow judges appointed by Democrats, then Democrats need to change the system." That is from Alex. Okay, so a couple different layers there. First of all, I'll go back around the table. Judge Marks, he's pointing to the Merrick Garland episode 10 years ago, in which we have a situation where, there's still around a year left in the Obama presidency. The Republicans say that's too close to an election. We're not going to let this get out of committee. We're not going to have a vote. And there's no vote. And it effectively gives a Republican president the nomination. And Alex's perspective is that was a change point, that ever since then, everything has become political. It's become more politicized than ever before. And we should not think it's normal for the President of the United States to opine on the intelligence level of the court based on whether they're doing his bidding. So let's start with that. Agree or disagree with the emailer there?
Why don't you start with Judge Dollinger?
Oh,
That's one of the most
Yeah, it's
difficult
just equity.
questions you've asked.
It's going back and around.
Okay. I find it difficult to say, let's do what they do and let's pack the court. And yet I see the Merrick Garland example is one that makes you think again about it. So I think you have to understand the reality of the situation. Expansion of the court is something we should seriously consider, but I'm reluctant because it's perpetrating the political nature of the U.S. Supreme Court that, I'd like to see reforms in ethics and distancing from, and that might make a difference in how political the U.S. Supreme Court is. I'd prefer that to packing the court.
Well, last week on this program, we had the president of the College Republicans at the University of Rochester. We had a local Democratic leader, and they were talking about gerrymandering, but the idea of court packing also came up. Different reforms also came up. And the gerrymandering one sort of sounds the same thing. It's like, well, listen, if you're going to do this in Texas, we don't want to do this, but we will do this in California. We'll do this in Virginia. Maybe you'll do this in Florida. The spiral feels inevitable, unstoppable at that point. And Judge, if we allow for an expansion of the court, what is to say that the next president, when the party changes, doesn't re-expand the court, and then all of a sudden 9 justices become 15, and then it becomes 27, and then eventually it'd be 101. I mean, isn't it inevitable that we'll never get out of that spiral?
I think there's some limit on how far it can be expanded, but I'd have to defer to my constitutional lawyer expert.
I mean, I'm being hyperbolic. I just feel like...
But your point is well taken, that where do we stop? Where do we change? What's our core value? What's to promote the right things?
And do you agree with Alex, who says the court has always been political? No one who says we can remove politics from the court should be taken seriously. What do you make of that?
I guess I'm a little more hopeful. Having been a judge and understanding how your position has nothing to do with your personal opinions. If you're a good judge, a caring judge, one who upholds the Constitution, personal opinions have no place on the bench. So I guess I'm a dreamer looking for the value of it not being political. But as I'm listening to things every day in the past year or so, I may be mistaken in that belief and a little naive.
Well, Alex, I'm going to send this over to Judge Valentino, but Alex, tell me if I'm wrong here, the email, and follow up if you want. Send me a follow-up email. I think what Alex is saying, Judge Valentino, is that the court has always been political and that human beings are not, it's not possible to fully remove every bias you have. And I would say to Alex, there's a difference between being human and being an ideologue. Being purely ideological is a very big problem in the courts. Being human just means you do your best with your biases. You try to be self-aware. But I would never ask judges not to be human. I would ask judges to try not to be ideologues. Is that a fair distinction to you?
It's perfect.
Excellent.
Perfect distinction.
Okay. and I'm curious, Alex, let me know what you think about that. But in general, how do you feel about expansion of the court, Judge?
It's funny, I wrote down your words just as you were saying them. What's going to stop future presidents to making it larger and then larger? They're going to be as big as Congress someday if you keep adding. So I'm against adding more judges. It would spiral. And you talked about ideology, and I can say from my experience in the courts, I was a judge for 33 years. The judges in Monroe County do separate themselves. They are not ideological. Some may be accused on one case or another, but I did not see it personally. I did not hear about it. And the judges in this room all had great reputations for being human and not being ideological. We look at the Supreme Court now and everybody says, oh boy, they're all ideological. The Democrats only vote for the Democrat side. The Republicans only vote. But there are little bits of cracks. I think that Judge Gorsuch's opinion on the tariffs was an excellent opinion, where he was not ideological. Judge Coney Barrett had a great opinion on one of her cases. And if they can move back to being non-political, that would be great. I'm a bit like Judge Marks. I'm a bit of a naive sometimes, and I see things through rose-colored glasses. But I'm hoping that our Supreme Court does come back to that branch of government, the checks and balances branch that they're supposed to be.
Judge Ark, do you want to see the court expanded?
If you keep expanding it, it'll become a super legislature with no power. Because the quote from Andrew Jackson nails it on the head. You go out, you made your decision, you go out and enforce it. Mm-hmm. Well, they don't have an enforcement mechanism. That's the executive, and they don't have the power of the purse, which is the Congress. So they can get as big as they want, and the only thing they're going to do is dilute the impact they have from a prestige and a morality perspective. So it's going in the wrong direction to do that. And it'll just become, like I said, a super legislature.
Okay. Judge Dollinger, have you been moved to pack the court?
No. I side with my colleagues who say we shouldn't side it. And I want to just dovetail with something John just said. If you allow the rapid expansion of the Supreme Court, or any expansion of it, it becomes a House of Lords, mm-hmm. just like the House of Lords in England. As you know, the Parliament passes laws, and they have to go through the House of Lords. Who the hell's in the House of Lords? A bunch of dukes and earls, people running around with heraldic titles that they inherited from their family, and they have some say in what actually becomes law in the United Kingdom. We get to a court that is filled with people with lifetime appointments, and the number keeps growing. I think we end up with a House of Lords. And let me just add, politics in the Supreme Court, I'm looking around this room. I remember some people. Do you remember President Johnson's really close friend named Abe Fortas that he wanted to make the chief judge of the United States Supreme Court? And all of a sudden, the Democratic senator said, wait a second, he's too close to the president. He's got financial dealings with the president. This guy is, and Abe Fortas, I think everybody acknowledged, was a brilliant lawyer. It's just he was encumbered with too much politics. Remember Harold Carswell? You probably don't remember Harold Carswell. Harold Carswell was nominated by Richard Nixon to be on the Supreme Court of the United States. He ran into the same problem, and it was rejected by the Senate. He couldn't get through the Senate. You talk about Merrick Garland. From my point of view, what's so interesting about the politics of the recent Supreme Court is Breyer did the smart thing. What did he do? He didn't wait to die on the court. He resigned from the court when there was a Democratic president that allowed Joe Biden to fill the job. I'm one of those who, with all great respect, would have told Ruth Bader Ginsburg to do exactly the same thing so that Donald Trump didn't get that appointment. But my point is, these are all political decisions made by people on the court about when they go and when they come. I think it's an enormous mistake to think that we're going to weed politics out. I think what we've got to hope, and I think there are some cracks that appear, that these judges will take their responsibility very serious to serve only one thing, the Constitution of the United States, and not any other individual. And my hope is, in the birthright decision, that when it comes down, it will do exactly that.
Well, and on that note, on Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Peter writes in to say, rather than looking at expanding the court, your guest should comment on reasonable term limits to lessen the impact of momentary politics. And David writes in to say that if we had term limits for justices, the Ruth Bader Ginsburg controversy wouldn't have happened. And I think what David is referring to is just she passes away instead of deciding on her own terms when to leave. So, just briefly, Judge Dollinger, term limits for justices?
Here's the interesting thing. I actually think you could constitutionally limit the term of a United States Supreme Court judge, but you can't take away their title or their pay. You just put them in retirement status, just the same way Justice Breyer did. You're obligated to have a lifetime tenure. The other interesting thing about a retired Supreme Court judge, if you run into a situation where you have a conflict because someone in a party who appears in front of you paid for a bus for you to drive around the country in, which would otherwise create an inherent and unreversible conflict of interest, that judge could step aside and one of the retired judges could
Well, to
come
whom are you
table.
referring?
Well, I think it's 60 Minutes, and I don't think it's ever been disputed that one of the billionaires bought Clarence Thomas a traveling bus to drive around the country in, and the billionaire's interests were on several occasions before the court. That makes all judges look silly. And I think that's one thing we share, which is any judge who does something that creates a conflict of interest, violates ethical rules, does things like that, it makes us all look bad. That's all there is to it.
Okay,
it makes every judge
But
look
yes or
bad.
no, term limit is yes?
Yes, I would put a term limit, force them to retire at age 75, and keep them on the bench if you need them to fill spots.
Okay, Judge Ark, term limit?
Well, I've been the victim of a term limit by age, and I felt I had a couple of years left. And my fastball was a little slower, but my curveball
But you were
was
crafty.
still good. Yeah.
Yes.
I don't. There may be a competency question that you could have as superimposed over as they get older in firms or something like that. But
You don't want a strict age limit.
not a strict age limit. No.
Okay.
I'm not opposed to term limits. I don't think it would curtail their independence, but coupled with ethics reforms, just as Rick Dollinger stated.
Judge Marks?
Absolutely. Term limits and ethics reforms. I think that's critical to the independence issue.
After we take our only break, I've got more of your questions, comments, feedback. We've got 4 retired judges here. Patricia Marks, Joseph Valentino, John Ark, Rick Dollinger, and a piece that they have authored we will share in our show notes on this law day. It is law day. Of course it's law day. It's May 1st. You see the signs everywhere. May 1st is law day in this country, and we are talking about the value of the law and why it was established and what it means in 2026. More of your feedback on the other side. This is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Kathy writes to say, a couple comments and questions which may get way too far into the weeds to answer, but here goes. Judge Dollinger referred to the first 10 books of the Bible in one of his initial comments. It occurred to me that the Old Testament comes from an Asian or Mesopotamian tradition, and it is different than the Western Greek tradition that much of our civilization in Europe and the Americas is now based on. Had the Romans not adopted Christianity, built on the Old Testament, would our judicial system be different today? It is true that SCOTUS is the final word, but the overturning of precedent does seem very much ideological and political. That's from Kathy and Chilai. So it's an interesting question. Had the Romans not adopted Christianity, what would our judicial system look like today? Anyone want to go deep on that one?
Well, I'll just add, I mean, based on my knowledge of history, I mean, the Romans established a court system as part of governance. You cannot orderly govern, whether it's an empire or a civilization. You can't do it without rules and without laws. The minute you decide that you need rules, what do you absolutely have to have? You have to have a judge. And you couldn't establish a civilization, whether it was Rome or Carthage or Athens or Sparta. In the ancient world, you couldn't do it without judges. What actually happened in civilization is that after the Romans adopted Christianity, the Catholic Church basically set all the rules in Europe for the better part of a millennium. And they weren't judges, they were bishops and cardinals and the Pope who set down all the rules and enforced it all. That's when we had the theocratic origins of government. It wasn't until the rise of nation states after the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century that civil courts and civil leaders began to control the public life.
And Kathy's last comment, I'll go around the table and just ask our guests if they want to weigh in. To Kathy's perspective, when the Supreme Court overturned precedent, it does, in her words, very much seem ideological and political. Kathy, if you were on the phone, I would just ask you, and I understand that. I certainly understand that when you see rapid whipsawing of precedent overturned. A little less so when it's over the decades. And I think everybody would agree there are some sort of, by 2026 standards, objectively bad decisions. Dred Scott, but there's others. And you could look at that and say, this has to be overturned. This is not who we are. This was a mistake. But I understand Kathy is feeling like, okay, but now it's just used for whoever has the political power. Does it feel, I'll go back around the table, Judge Marks, does it feel like when there's an overturning of precedent, does it feel inherently ideological to you?
I think it is in the context of the frequency. I think you identified the issue well. And I've said to people, I don't know how constitutional law professors teach constitutional law, because precedent was such a strong part of that teaching and understanding of constitutional law.
Okay. Judge Valentino?
We as judges have to follow precedent, stare decisis, it's called. But in my life, and I imagine with the other judges, there have been times when something came before us, an issue where we felt that we had to divert from precedent. So I'm not against going against precedent as long as there's a valid legal reason to do it.
Okay, Judge Ark?
I think it's a good point. It's a question of validity. As a trial judge, we can always get around precedent by looking at the facts. Right. And I don't say that facetiously. Appellate courts are in a different situation. They can't play with the facts that we can, and they're really much more bound by stare decisis. When you get to the U.S. Supreme Court, there has to be a certain availability to change, and whether the rapidity of it can be a real problem, particularly if it's an obvious political dynamic. But don't forget, the politics can also mirror what's happening in the society at the time. So, for example, should Dred Scott have been reversed a year later? There might not have been a civil war had it been. Okay, so each case obviously has to look at its own merit, but there's enough latitude to have a dynamic within the process.
Judge Dollinger?
I agree with the other speakers. The facts oftentimes drive certainly a trial judge, and I think the appellate judges as well, an ability to make exception for precedent. But the other thing that strikes me as interesting from a historical perspective is Dred Scott was overturned by the 13th Amendment. There was a constitutional amendment passed to change Dred Scott to take enslaved people who were considered property and not persons and made them persons. There's a case that came down that nobody really thinks about anymore. It's an 1873 case from the Supreme Court called Minor against Happersett, in which the Supreme Court of the United States said, "Oh, women are people. It's just they can't vote." And that was overturned by the 19th Amendment. You had Plessy against Ferguson from the latter stages of the 19th century, which said segregation was legal, separate but equal was legal. You could separate the races. Brown versus the Board of Education in the 1950s changes that. That's what led to the impeach Earl Warren crusade. The other thing I just want to say is that I think there's a tremendous value in precedent because it allows lawyers in making arguments, structuring their businesses, structuring their criminal defense on the basis of a precedent to know that they have fixed law that they can count on, that they can use as the basis for an argument, is a huge tool to lawyers. If precedents constantly change, the reliability of the legal system is called into question, and that just makes it more difficult for lawyers and people throughout the system. I want to add one final fact about politics. Just remember the greatest political mistake made in the last 75 years in the United States Supreme Court. Dwight D. Eisenhower took a man who had challenged him for the 1952 nomination to be the Republican candidate for President of the United States. He was the Attorney General of the state of California. He had imprisoned the Japanese internment folks in the Korematsu case. He was considered the most right-wing guy you could find to be on the United States Supreme Court. He was the guy whose name was impeach Earl Warren, the former governor. He was considered a radical conservative who ushered the court into an era of complete change in our criminal justice system and our civil rights system. To some extent, sometimes that political observation, that political intention backfires. Earl Warren ended up with a tremendous sense of where the public was going, and in the 1950s and 60s, he changed it, which gets to John's point, which is sometimes a shift in the culture and in the society requires that the court take another look at those precedents.
All right. This is from Jerry. Jerry emails to say, did not know there was a law day. Thank you. So there you go. You're all educating the public on law day. And Jerry says, what can the public do to help ensure that the independence of the courts are protected? Rick Dollinger, I'll start with you.
Very simple. When people criticize judges, simply say those guys are women and men are simply doing the job that they swore they would uphold the Constitution and the laws of the state of New York and of this country, and they're doing their damnedest to make sure that they do. He was following his oath. Did he make a mistake? The appellate divisions will decide that. Somebody else will decide that.
But you can criticize.
Oh, you can clearly be criticized. The notion, well, I said this a number of times. I've said this about my colleagues in the Hall of Justice and elsewhere. I disagree with that decision, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to lose faith in the people who are making those decisions on a day-to-day basis.
That's it. And I think one of you made, I think, an important point on what social media has done to the discourse. And I think to Rick's point, it used to be that you might criticize a decision. And too often now, a decision that somebody doesn't like becomes ipso facto evidence that they are some sort of an agent of something dark.
Correct.
Part of some kind of a conspiracy. something bigger than just we disagree on this. Hope I used ipso facto correctly. Okay. Evidence on its own, right? I mean, like, okay. Anyway, I'm not doing the Latin test. Judge Ark, Jerry wants to know, what can the public do to help with all of this?
Vote. Really, it's their ultimate. Vote and serve as a juror when you get summoned to come and be a juror. Those are.
Oh, that's a good one.
Those, when you look, years ago, I had a very involved case to challenge the New York State. They were properly educating students in high school or in our public schools, and the standard is that the constitutional standard is that people have to be educated to the point that they can vote and serve on a jury, and those are your two fundamental obligations as a citizen. And if people knew that the three of us were all elected judges, Judge Dollinger was appointed, but how many times have you run for office? 13?
13 times I was on the
And I've
ballot.
run 9 times. Between the two of us, we've run 22 times. So, okay, which is pretty remarkable that we're only like 25 years old.
Correct. We were very young when we ran.
And but that's the responsibility of the citizen. Is that the citizens are out there. We know you're out there. We care about what you think, and particularly for elected judges, you've an impact on my future.
Judge Valentino, what can people do?
Well, everybody has a First Amendment right to criticize, as we've been talking about. But I think that what people should do is do a little more than criticize. Look into why are we disagreeing? What law did this judge follow, or what law didn't the judge follow? I noticed that recently, if a judge rules against you, he or she is an activist judge.
Of course.
That's the new term.
That's the definition of activism. It's things you don't like that
Correct.
they do.
That's right. I lost, so he's an activist
Yes,
judge.
exactly right.
So I think they should, I know it's easy for us to say, but people should do a little bit more research as to why they're angry at this guy or woman. Why did that happen? You know, that's my feeling.
Okay, Judge Marks.
I agree with a lot of what was said. I would also add, get involved with judicial campaigns, understand the background of the people running for judge. There are forums. The Greater Rochester Association of Women Attorneys sponsors an event at which the candidates speak, and you can find out about their background. They can't give opinions on how they'll rule in the future, but they can tell you about their background and their passion and whether or not they'll make good judges, and it's a good opportunity. We don't get a lot of public attendance in that forum.
Let me finish up with David writing from Ovid. He says, why can't the U.S. use a less partisan process? For example, the U.K. uses what they call a selection commission, which is comprised of experienced professional attorneys who choose candidates based on merit, not on their political views. Canada has a similar system. Why can't we do that? I have no idea what Canada and the U.K. do. I trust David on that one, but he wants a less partisan system. Anybody concerned with the partisan nature of go ahead.
The difficulty with committees that appoint, and which happens with respect to committees that appoint some of the judges within New York State, is the people on the commission are political appointees. So the question is whether that can work in a meaningful way and that the standards could provide the balance in that commission. But that's subject to politics, too, so we can't be naive about the independent commission.
Okay. Judge Valentino, you agree?
Well, I read an article where there was a hybrid system that was proposed by some bar associations where this fellow that called in there, his thing about the English system where they're appointed through that committee, a judge would be appointed, and then after a year or a certain time limit, he or she runs for election, and they run on their record. And they don't run as a Republican, they don't run as a Democrat, they run, and they have to have a certain percentage of yes votes. That, I would be in favor of something like that rather than just all-out appointment.
Okay, very good. Well, and I'm going to use this opportunity before we close just to ask Judge Ark. You mentioned serve on a jury if you're called. what will people, 30 seconds, what will people gain if they serve on a jury and they're dreading it and they're going, I can't believe I got called here. What do they get?
Particularly involved cases like a homicide or something like that. We have, well, I was the chairman of the jury board for like 15, 20 years. Okay, so the feedback we get is that people had like post-trial stress after serving on an involved case. They got so intrigued with the case, got so committed to the case, that when the case was over, they actually suffered from some depression. And I think, Judge Marks, you probably did more visible cases or high than we did.
I took the time to talk to the jurors and kind of talk them down.
The only thing I can say is get involved, serve as a jury. You're going to very much enjoy it.
And I think what Judge Ark is really telling us is, even if you're dreading it, look how invested people get in learning the case and learning the law and caring about the outcome, which is a beautiful thing. That's what it's supposed to be. So there's lots of ways that people, to Jerry's point, can do something about all of this. But I want to thank our guests, retired judges, all of them, Rick Dollinger, John Ark, Joseph Valentino, Patricia Marks. Thank you for your experience and your expertise and for sharing it with us on this Law Day. Happy Law Day, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us, Evan.
Outstanding stuff. More connections coming up in just a moment.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.